Hey guys, this is B. Claymore and welcome to the Comic Book Writer. Today I want to talk about comic book pitching, specifically pitching a creator-owned book. Recently I've been working on several new things, primarily creator-owned books, and I've been going through the process of assembling the pitches for these books. And it's kind of occurred to me, I got stuck on one that has everything done. I mean, the story's there, the art's there. I think it's got a good hook. But I sort of got hung up for some reason, and what I ended up doing was going back and looking at the very first pitch I ever put together, which was for Hawaiian Dick. And to my mind, it's still the most concise, the clearest, and the best pitch I've ever done. And I've tried to use it as a template for what I've done since then. The problem is I don't always go back and revisit it and look at it physically to see what worked about it. So I did that with this recent pitch, and I realized that I was getting a little convoluted and throwing too much information at people as I put the pitch together. So what I'd like to do here is revisit this initial pitch, which is my, as I clear out these email messages popping up for my son. Anyway, what I'd like to do is go back and revisit that initial pitch. And as this channel grows, I'll talk more about pitching comics with maybe more specific focus on different elements of pitching. But it's something that people always ask about, especially aspiring creators. And I think people tend to make it a little harder than it needs to be. When I was working full-time at Image, the Image message boards had a thread that was basically the Image pitch thread. And there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of posts in this thread. And they all were overcomplicating the process and focusing too much on the specific requirements that Image had listed that needed to be in a pitch. And it kind of occurred to you at some point that most of these people were never actually going to pitch anything. They were so hung up on the technicalities. I did a couple breaking into comics panels in the past with Matt Fraction, who used to be a Kansas City guy, and he used a term that always comes to mind when people would ask these questions about breaking into comics. The term he used was hypothetical comics. All these people talk about the comics they're going to do, and they get so hung up on how to pitch them and what the end result is going to look that they never just sit down and do them. It kind of works the same with pitching. So basically, every comic book publisher, including Image, that accepts pitches will have a submissions guideline somewhere on their website. And that's the first place to start. And what I would recommend is kind of looking at different publishers and their different guidelines. Generally, they're pretty much the same in what they're looking for, especially if they receive a lot of pitches. They want a written pitch and they want to see finished artwork. They want to see what the book is going to look like. This is in particular if you're going to pitch a project where you and a collaborator, whether you're a writer with an artist or an artist with a writer, have assembled the pitch together. In Image's case, they ask for some specifics about the pitch in written style or in written format, and then they ask generally for 5 pages of finished pages, which means colored, lettered, because ultimately it's up to you to do the book. So that gives them an idea of how the book reads, what it looks like, what the coloring and lettering looks like. I think they may also request cover options, which is it's a good idea to include thoughts on cover art as well. Now, having said that, when we first pitched Hawaiian Dick, which ultimately was published by Image, we didn't have Image in mind for the pitch. So we didn't follow by the letter Image's guidelines. We sort of intuitively put together what we thought was the best way to sell it. So what I've got here up on my screen is actually pages from the second trade paperback, in which we include the second Hawaiian Dick trade paperback, in which we included the original written pitch as well as the black and white pages that we included with the pitch. So to start with here, as you can see, this first page is pretty basic. Now, in journalism, there's a thing called the inverted pyramid. And basically what that tells you is that you put the most important information up top and the less important information below it. So at the very least, you hook the reader with the initial statement, premise, news item. It's the key information. And then if they're interested, they'll keep reading downward for more details. It's the same way in pitching a book. You always want to start with a strong hook or a strong concept, something that grabs an editor's attention. Likewise, in Hollywood, there's a thing they refer to as the elevator pitch. Can you pitch me a project from the time we get into the elevator to the time the elevator reaches our floor and we get off the elevator. The most key thing in any written pitch is hooking people immediately. It's just like a brand new comic book. If you've got the first issue of a new comic book, you've got to grab the reader initially. In the first few pages, you've got to give them something to hook onto and keep them reading. So now in this case, I did the old high concept line, which in this one was the X-Files meets the Rockford Files in a film noir version of 1950s Hawaii. When I pitched this, and actually I guess it's true again now with the revival of the X-Files, but when I pitched this, the X-Files was a pretty common touchstone for people. And what I was trying to do was just imply that there is a supernatural element to this. The Rockford Files was kind of a risk to throw in there because even when this was pitched, the show had been off the air for over 20 years. But the Rockford Files was a key inspiration, and if anyone was familiar with the show, hopefully they could understand the tone. And then what I did was just did very briefly the basic concept. Bird, a former big city detective, is recruited to track down a stolen car. In the process of investigation, Bird and his sidekick, Detective Mo Kalama, stumble upon a complicated kidnapping plot. Before the case is solved, the two will cross paths with an eccentric drug lord and his scheming henchman, the psychic aunt of two island beauties, the vengeful night marchers of the Poly Highway, and the murdered kidnapping victim returned from the dead. Now, you might think I would want to lead with these elements about the supernatural stuff, but actually one of the keys to the book has always been that the supernatural stuff is secondary to the rest of the story. I've always looked at the supernatural things as stumbling blocks that get thrown in the way of the character as he tries to solve whatever non-supernatural case he's working on. So we followed, and again, in this format is similar to how I write a script. It's clearly spaced. I mean, this stuff is important because it makes it very easy to read. When an editor or a publisher opens this document, they can see very quickly that they can read this without having to slog through too much information. So we followed the concept with the setting, and in this case, the setting was very important to the book. We tried to explain that it's sort of a hyper-stylized version of Hawaii in the 50s. Key elements included those, again, just to kind of give an indication of the tone of the book, setting and time frame to the fullest, involving Hawaiian mythology and folklore. We borrow the feel from 50s film noir. Now, in terms of how I put the pitch together, basically I just threw a whole bunch of pop culture elements that I was really into together and put them in a pot and tried to make them coherent. And so for my first Stephen Griffin was my collaborator, but for my first sort of personal project, I knew I wanted something that would keep me interested and that I could really fuel my engagement by lacing it with all these elements that entertained me. And that's the best way to approach a creator-owned book. Instead of trying to figure out the market and sort of calculate what's going to sell and what's not going to sell, if you do something that's true to you, that you know you enjoy, the odds are pretty good that you're going to find other people that will enjoy it as well. Format, a 3-issue limited series. Turns out that was probably a mistake. At the time, we thought that a 3-issue limited series, because it was shorter, would give us a better chance of being published. That was us not really understanding the market that early in the game. Probably should have done a 4 or 5 issue limited series, but that's what we pitched. Now, if that interests you as a publisher, then you can go into the secondary page, which is where we introduce the characters. And we actually tell some of the story of the book through the different characters. We talk about the main character here. We explain who he is, kind of talk about his attitude and what sort of character he is. World-weary and slightly cynical. He's fairly upbeat. We're trying not to be cliched with the beaten-down detective character. And really, we thought the environment we put him in would sort of help delineate him from other characters like that. And then we've got the other characters, which are local characters, his sidekick, sort of the lead female character, the villain, and then the other characters that are involved in the story, and then the Night Marchers, which is again sort of down the list, the overwhelming supernatural aspects of the story are there's a zombie, which I know isn't really Hawaiian culture. We tried to explain that in the story, and then there's the Night Marchers. So there you've got the basic story elements, the characters. That's 2 pages of the pitch. The 3rd page, then we went into the actual story. So again, if you're hooked at this point, you want to hear about the story. So we do basically go through what happens in issue 1, what happens in issue 2. Now, this is before the story was written, mind you. So in a lot of ways, this worked as an outline for the story. And here's the other thing, is that once the story was approved, we didn't really have to follow this outline to the letter. That's something people don't always think about. You give an editor or a publisher an outline so they want to know where the story is going. A mistake a lot of people make when they pitch a story is to sort of use it as a teaser, and then what happens next? Well, no. The publisher and the editor want to know how it ends so they know you've got a strong conclusion in mind. I see that all the time, and people sort of resist that idea. Like they think they're hooking an editor or a publisher like they're hooking a reader. Well, that's not what you want to do. You want the editor and publisher to have complete faith that you know where you're going with the story, and that it'll be enough that the mystery involved in how you solve the story will be enough to engage the readership. So issue 1, issue 2, issue 3, which for this was the concluding issue, and as you can see, spoiler alert, we talk about the epilogue and how the story ends. And this actually is fairly close to how the story tracked, but I'm sure there are differences between this and the published version. Anyway, your main goal with the pitch is to sell the book. Always keep that in mind. So once you've sold the book, if things vary a little bit from the pitch, that's fine. You've sold the book, which is it's not the hardest work. The hard work is making the book, but it's not easy to sell a book to anybody. So then we also included some black and white artwork, a scene. Again, it wasn't written. We wrote these scenes out of context. Stephen Griffin, the artist, drew them black and white. And we had this 2-page scene where Bird, the lead character, accosts a bad guy. And what ended up happening is when we pitched the book, intending it to be black and white because the publishers we had originally targeted specialized in black and white books, when Image picked it up and encouraged us to do it in color, we did take this initial scene and Stephen just redid it in color. And because he does everything digitally, he tweaked some of the drawings and kept in mind that this was for color and not black and white. And as you can see, green became his sort of primary focus here. We also did so this 2-page scene appeared in the book as is, some slight tweaks in color. Then we had another scene where Bird and Masaki and this bad guy first run into the Night Marchers. So we drew this, had this scene. The Night Marchers appear sort of in the middle of this page and kind of carry the guy off. Now, once we actually went to publication, we reconsidered the impact of this page and realized that it was sort of lacking. I mean, the Night Marchers first, you can hear them coming on the first page and they appear in the middle of the second page. Again, we didn't have a lot of experience doing comics, really, so when we put this together, I don't think we thought about what kind of impact these characters should have. So this is a scene that we actually expanded and redrew when the first issue came out. As you can see, the Night Marcher, the drums are coming. Then there's this scene. We try to sort of do a cinematic scene cutting, boom, 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 as the language gets harder. And then the Night Marchers appear on the last panel, hopefully with more impact than just appearing in the middle of the page. And then the subsequent scene where they carry this character off happened in the second issue. So my opinion, even looking back, made for a much stronger image and a much stronger scene. Now, really, what I've just shown you is really all you absolutely probably need to include in a pitch. Generally speaking, I would include character designs. I would include some cover and logo ideas, assuming you've got good ideas for those. But the most important part is always going to be this initial written pitch. What they're going to look at. They're going to look at this, and then they're going to look at the pages you send. Right now, if they open up the book or open up your pitch, and they're not interested in the artwork, the story doesn't flow, they don't like what they see there, then there's really no reason for them to even invest the time to read this part. You have to keep that in mind. That's why I tell people, if you're a writer, don't take a great idea and work with a collaborator that you don't connect with or that you don't really think is up to snuff for the story you're telling, because then the idea is gone and it sinks or swims as much on their effort as your effort. And likewise, if you're an aspiring artist, don't work with someone who has an idea that you don't totally invest in, because it'll show in your work. So we were lucky enough that the artwork really grabbed the eye of Eric Stevenson and then Jim Valentino. And oddly enough, although we had originally intended to pitch it strictly in black and white because we had included some color samples, the color really grabbed their attention. And what I don't have handy the other visual pages that we included in the pitch, because it was an actual printed out paper pitch that we had stapled together, or I had stapled together. Stephen, the artist, is in Australia, and I'm here in the States. And I had originally pitched this to Image in person at Wizard World Chicago, which I will tell you right now, that was something that at the time and even now they didn't encourage. Written pitches handed to publishers and editors of conventions can often get lost in the shuffle. But the fact is, I had finished the pitch the night before I handed it to them in a hotel room with writer Jay Torres, who helped me sort of tweak what I did. And so the next day at the show, I handed a physical copy to Jim Valentino, who was the publisher at Image at the time. And he did sort of roll his eyes at me that I was handing him a written pitch because he'd made it clear he didn't love it. But luckily, he handed it over to Eric Stevenson, who at the time was the PR and marketing coordinator. And later in the show, I came by the Image booth and I talked to Eric and said, hey, I gave a pitch to Jim and it was Hawaiian Dick. And Eric immediately responded with, oh, yeah, that looked really cool. I'm looking forward to looking at it. So luckily, it got into Eric's hands and he was intrigued by it. And then the way the book was ultimately approved is about less than 2 weeks later, maybe like a week later, I got an email from Eric that, great, I mean, we're ready to go. We love this. What format do you want? Blah, blah, blah. And still to this day, I mean, I've done work for everybody in comics and written Superman and Batman stories and what have you. But to this day, that email from Eric was kind of the high watermark for me. I mean, I don't think I've ever been as excited as I was when I got that email, because it kind of meant a lot of the hard work was finally starting to pay off. And with a project that was very personal. So I'm going to switch off here and kind of flip through the first trade, which has some of the other images that we included with our pitch. So we included these full color kind of Sunday comic strips in the original pitch, these two in particular. Actually, this one on the left is the first thing Stephen ever drew for Hawaiian Dick. And at the time, we thought we might pitch this book to Oni Press. And Oni Press was mainly publishing black and white books, but they also published on their website some full color comic strips. So we thought this might be a way to kind of hedge our bets. So these were a series of strips we did. And in the trade here, Stephen sort of demonstrated below how he came up with each, the process he went through to do the illustrations on each strip. But including those in the pitch, along with, let's see, here we go. Yeah, this is one of the possible cover images we included. This is, and honestly, we didn't use this because Stephen hadn't quite figured out what he was doing. And then over here, this was the pitch front cover, which we used some existing kind of art and demonstrated Stephen's design sense. And then we included this full color pin-up here that Stephen did as well, which kind of demonstrated his style with color. And we also included, they're not in here really, but we included some basic character sheets, some model sheets, just to kind of give an indication of the visuals for each character. But again, when Image saw the pitch, these color strips are what encouraged them to ask us if we really wanted to do the book in black and white, because they responded so well to these. And we were like, sure, we'll do whatever. If you think color is the right thing to do, that's what we'll do. So we did them in color. And as a result, Stephen Griffin earned 3 separate Eisner nominations for Best Colorist from the first 2 Hawaiian Dick series. And as well as that, he was nominated for the Russ Manning Newcomer of the Year award the year the book came out, which was awarded during the Eisner ceremonies as well. These first 2 strips were actually the very first things that he drew before we did any sample pages or anything like that. So they don't quite fit in completely with the graphic design sense of the rest of the book, but he drew these in a way to kind of convince me that this is the book we should do together when I wasn't sure if he was right for Hawaiian Dick the first time we met. And the strip on the left is the one that really convinced me that he would throw himself completely into whatever we were trying to do. So anyway, we included these, and it's a good thing we did. A little extra material, and it led us to doing full color books. All right, guys, so there you have it. This is the first pitch I ever put together. This is the pitch that I've tried to use as a template for subsequent pitches. And with these new pitches I'm putting together, going through this and revisiting how I put this initial pitch together has helped me sort of dial back and focus on just including the important information in what I'm pitching to people now without getting bogged down in too many details and things that they won't pay attention to. The big difference now is that I probably won't have any printed copies of the new pitches. I'll just put them together in PDF form, which I'll then upload to my Google Drive, and I can send physical copies of the PDFs, but I'll probably just include links to the Google Drive to people that I pitch the book to, along with an email explaining what I have in mind. So, and what I'll also do is I'll take this initial written pitch and I will put together a document and make that available in the comments below. I'll put a link to the pitch if you want to download it and take a look at it, and maybe use it for something you're doing yourself. All right, guys, thanks a lot once again. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know if you liked the video. Let me know what else you want to hear about, and we will see you next time.